Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, stay with us. My special guest this week is Senior U.S. Senator Robert P. Casey, otherwise known as Bob Casey. He's on the program. We'll be back in a minute.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, welcome back. If you're watching the program on WGAL, it's 11:30, not 7:30. We changed the time of the program, but I want to thank the viewers around the state and also on PCN for watching the program. And again, on WGAL TV, last year you made us #1, all the Sunday commentary programs, state as well as national, among adult viewers. It's all about you. We try to get interesting guests. We have, good conversations, Republicans and Democrats. Our U.S. senators are always welcome as long as our governor. And now I'm going to turn to our U.S. senator, one of our U.S. senators, Senator Robert Casey. Thanks as always for coming on.
Terry, good to be with you. Thank you.
You've been a little busy down there in Washington the last couple of weeks, right?
We have.
Well, let's talk about the Middle East. You served on the Foreign Relations Committee. You've issued some statements recently about our positions over there. The president last week made a decision to send 50 special forces in there to assist. It's gotten very complicated. You've got Russia and Putin making a bold stand. We know that not only are they fighting against ISIS, but they're fighting to prop up the Syrian government. And that's shaken up the whole dynamic in the Middle East. What's your sense about where all that stands?
Well, it is complicated and it's consequential at the same time. We have to figure out a way to do what the president wants to do, and I think people in both parties want to do, which is to lead a coalition to defeat ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, even it's another, all this terminology for this entity which has emerged over the last couple of years. And in so many ways, it's not only a terrorist organization, but it's an army. They hold territory. Right. So it's a real threat to the region, and ultimately to us, if they could take over a state and then direct their terror at us. So that's the broader goal, and we have to continue to lead that coalition and frankly get more of those other countries to do more on support for that effort. But we cannot, in my judgment, be successful on the strategy as it relates to ISIS until we deal with and resolve the Syria question. And that's not going to be won militarily, even despite the recent news about the president sending special operations forces. Ultimately, Syria is going to be solved by a political solution, a negotiation, and that could take a long time. Secretary Kerry's leading that effort now, but we've got to make progress on that if we're going to be successful in the larger goal, which is to defeat ISIS. Must
there be a way to get Assad out of the leadership of Syria that, gives him some way to do that, so that there can be you've got these Free Syria forces, at work. We support them. Russia doesn't, let's be honest.
Right.
And that creates that tension. We all agree about ISIS, Russia, us, and a lot of our allies.
Right.
But it seems to me that we're in this mix, and unless we're more forceful about it, I think a lot of Americans are now concerned about the role that Putin's playing over there. He could be the dominant factor in the Middle East, replacing our influence over time.
Well, he's made some provocative moves lately. With a bombing campaign and otherwise, but I'm not sure his strategy is going to work out well for him in the long run. One result of that could be that he gives Assad some temporary security, which may force the hand of Assad to actually have a negotiation now. We don't know how it'll play out, but what has to happen is a negotiation because, and I would say, and I said this this week on the floor of the Senate, that what cannot happen as a result of these negotiations is that Assad stays. He's got to go. When you kill 250,000 of your own people,
oh my gosh,
and your actions are the reason that half the population is displaced. Think about it, Terry. Half of their population is outside their home, either displaced within the country or they're refugees. That's like, if it were happening in our country, that would be 150 million Americans out of their homes.
And Europe isn't prepared, and that's somewhat understandable that all of a sudden you have, I saw a figure, 800,000, I don't know what, Germany alone has been open and willing to take them. Now we're looking at a global crisis. having to do, and many, you don't know if ISIS fighters or terrorists among them, but the vast majority are not. I think you would agree, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the same time as we're saying what we should be doing, we've got to get these Gulf countries to do more. Our taxpayers have given $4.5 billion of humanitarian aid. We've done great work in terms of being a humanitarian leader when it comes to the people of Syria. But these Gulf countries have to do a lot more in terms of taking refugees, putting fighters on the ground instead of asking our soldiers to do it. I've said that we can't have just a coalition of coat holders holding our coat while we do the fighting. We need those countries to do some of the fighting and help with refugees.
All right, I'm chatting with Senator Bob Casey. We're going to be back in a minute. Last week they did a budget. They avoided the default, and I want to ask the senator a little bit about that. And maybe we'll get into the dynamics of, I don't know what it would be like to be a senator today with all the dysfunction that even some senators are saying, and we know what's going on in the House of Representatives. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, welcome back. My special guest is Senator Bob Casey. He's on the Finance Committee of the Senate. He's on, I think, 4 other committees, if I can keep all the committees that these senators serve on straight. And he was Auditor General and State Treasurer before that. We're delighted to have him here. And our other senator, Toomey, has an open invitation to appear. All right, Senator, let's talk a little bit now. I know it's over, and you're not going to talk about it for a while. It's done. No default. Right? The debt ceiling has been raised, and the budget increased about $80 billion, half defense, half domestic spending. You voted for that. Why did you vote for it?
Well, because I thought it was important to get the default off the table, so we won't default. And that just takes care of a nightmare scenario that would have befallen the country. Secondly, I think it was good that we had a bipartisan agreement to lift these budget caps. We have to make sure, in my judgment, that we're investing in the parts of our budget that will help us grow: research, medical research, education, infrastructure. So we've been light on that because of this crazy across-the-board sequester that no family would run their checkbook that way, no business would, but the federal government tried to do it, where you treat wasteful programs the same way you treat effective programs like research. Yeah. So we've lifted that, but it's not over in the sense that we're going to be facing these issues every couple of years. But it was a good bipartisan effort
to get through the
beyond
presidential election, right?
Right.
And that might be a good thing, although I think government spending is going to be certainly dominate the presidential election. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, but the interesting thing here is that what Democrats have been saying for years is if we can lift these budget caps, we should apply the same rule for defense and non-defense, meaning parity, and that's what we got. Yeah. We basically got about $50 billion more for this year coming up, and then another 30 for the second year. It'll be enormously helpful to foster growth in the economy.
Mm-hmm. So at least through the presidential election, I mean, that decision about no government default in the budget is done, and regardless of what your position is on that, you can't continue to have that insecurity.
Right.
And who knows what, as you point out, we can argue about the budget side of it, but I don't know about the default. I mean, that seems like I don't say much about that, but it seems like you can't default. That didn't make any sense.
We're the gold standard for the world in terms of paying our bills every time since 1789.
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah.
we don't want to get anywhere near that, and it really is about paying your bills.
All right, I got to go to a topic that trucks. They're bigger, they're heavier, and you have a concern about something that could happen, right?
Well, we found out a couple of weeks ago that some folks in the House, and I hope not the Senate, but maybe, we're talking about adding an amendment to the transportation bill, which would allow these double trailers to get even longer. So each trailer would get would be longer if this were allowed to if this were allowed to go through.
Yeah.
So you have these massive trucks that would be 60 or 70 feet longer. That makes no sense. They're dangerous enough. They're big enough already.
Yeah.
So we got to try to stop it, and we're going to need a lot of help from folks around the state to make the point that the double stack trailers are long enough.
Yeah, but I have a question. I mean, is that yeah, I mean, given accidents, I mean, almost every week in south central Pennsylvania on the highways, there's a truck. I'm not blaming the truckers. I mean, you know, who knows,
right.
Lots of different reasons. But they are big and they go fast. And yeah, I don't quite, is the motivation that they can carry more goods and therefore, from their point of view, be more efficient, you
That's
think?
the argument they make, but here's the problem. The number of accidents, truck-related accidents in Pennsylvania has skyrocketed just in the last several years, each and every year.
Yeah.
So the safety factor alone should cause us not to do it. Now, if there's some other state in another part of the country that has a flatter terrain than we do, has an easier winter, we'll let them do what they want. But you shouldn't impose this upon Pennsylvania because some special interest in Washington wants it.
So you think that each state, that's something that each state, based on their own...
They want to do that, but I don't think there's much support for it in our state. We've got plenty of roads that have these double trailers on them. And the worst thing for our roads and the worst thing for safety would be to make those even longer.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, there's an obvious, serious concern about child poverty. Senator Casey has been working on that. We're going to have him weigh in on proposals to reduce child poverty, and we'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Welcome back to the program. If you're watching on WGAL, it's 11:30 a.m., not 7:30 a.m. on Sundays. We changed our time. I hope that works out for you. Send us an email or get a hold of me and let me know what you think about the time change. At any rate, there's a lot of interest now in what we do with young folks. Not just the millennials that are on our college campuses and about employment for them and what the job outlook is, and many of them returning back home, living with their parents while they find a job. I think that's lessening now, but it would certainly had grown almost exponentially. But there's also this concern about young kids, child poverty and early learning. I think there's a link there, but let's talk about the child poverty piece of that, about obviously the private sector plays a role, and you think so does government, right?
Yeah, I think one thing we should do at a minimum, and this is, I think, should be the subject of a lot of support in a bipartisan way, is to have a strategy for kids, and one of those should be, why don't we set a goal for the next decade of cutting child poverty in half? Here's just one number. If you look at 2008 numbers, just before the terrible recession we had, compare them to 2014, child poverty went up from about 18% to 21%. Some people believe it went up to about 22%. But that 4 percentage point increase means millions more kids are living in poverty.
Yeah.
And there's no way that those children, for the most part, can succeed in school, succeed in life, and be part of our workforce in the most productive way if we don't have a strategy to reduce child poverty. And as you said, early learning, I've said this a thousand.
But hold on, before you leave that, in Britain, did you talk about a program they have in Britain? It seems to.
Yeah, they said
say something about that. I think it's worth commenting about.
In the 90s, they made the Brits made a goal of reducing child poverty. They cut it in half in 10 years. Yeah. Now they got a ways to go. We've got even further to go. But I think this is a mission worthy of a great nation, and we should do this for that child, for his or her family, but for for the employers. One of the greatest consensus areas of late is the recognition by CEOs and business leaders, small business and large businesses, that we have to make sure kids learn more now and earn more later, meaning learn more when they're very young, early learning, good health care, keep them healthy, and make sure that they have the building blocks for success. If a child has enough to eat and they get intensive early learning and they get good health care, get out of the way. They can do anything they want. But if we don't have a strategy for those kids...
But it seems like almost an intractable program or problem. You've got a lot of young kids. They live in families, that are not as functional as they used to be. We're asking the schools to do more and more, and other folks. Right. I mean, that's just really tough unless we have an entire society, private sector, public sector, local, state, federal. We were just talking recently about Philadelphia, obviously the biggest city in the state, and the goal of the new mayor to do something about poverty. Mm-hmm. Well, you need a strategy at all three levels, don't you? And it's not just about money, but you have to have a plan that works.
Right.
And that's what they've been. That's been a discussion in the Philly mayor's election that just recently took place.
Yeah, all the bang for the buck studies show if you invest in early learning, we all benefit, in addition to the child. But you're right, it can't just be a set of programs focused on that individual child or group of children, millions of them around the country. We've got to focus on their parents, the people taking care of them. A lot of that gets back to this issue of growing the economy, getting people into jobs, or at least getting them into a job that'll help them lift them and their children out of poverty.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We'll have the last segment. I have to ask the guy who's on the Finance Committee about the Federal Reserve and what's going to happen with interest rates. He's smiling. We'll see if we're going to have more money. We'll put money in Treasury notes and maybe get more interest, and we'll see what that effect is. I'm going to ask Senator Casey that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I'm back. The Senator and I were having an off-camera conversation before you joined us. Senator Bob Casey is. All right, now, every couple of months, the big debate that takes place is whether the Federal Reserve is going to raise, basically the discount rate, I guess, which raises the interest rate. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or is it both have positives and negatives? I don't know.
Well, it's hard to tell. Now, the big drama might be in December, what might happen there, and I'm certainly not going to guess.
No, why? No, we would all be wrong anyway.
Nor will the Federal Reserve do what I want them to do.
Yeah, right.
But it's obviously a key determinant of our economy is going to be what the impact of interest rates.
So if they raise the interest rates, that means they think the economy is improving enough so that people will be able to pay more interest when they borrow money, correct?
That's a better description than most in Washington give. Yes.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I'm just
good.
Trying to do
That's
it.
Good.
Yeah.
But it's you just hope that when they make that kind of a move, they've made it based upon an assessment that things have stabilized enough to move in that direction. But we'll see what they do. But this challenge of keeping the job market robust is a difficult one.
Does it end up being a disincentive for people to borrow and for people to get loans on homes and to refinance and all of that. And you got to wonder at some point, inflation is not certainly a huge problem right now. I mean, this is a long period with low inflation, which is good for the workers, and that's where I'm heading.
Right.
We've got a serious income gap here, wage gap, income gap, that everyone talks about. Republicans talk about it, Democrats talk about it. Both of you, by party, you have a different way to approach it.
Right.
But there is a serious problem with the lack of the middle class having reasonable wage increases over the course of, the last 8-10 years or whatever period you want to look at.
No, I think both parties have, when you look at it over time, over 40 years, failed on the basic test of having a game plan to grow incomes. Well, Terry, one of the most chilling charts I've seen in all my years in government was the Economic Policy Institute way back in January, and they've updated this chart, but the left side of the chart is World War II to 1973. Basically a quarter of a century where productivity was up 97, wages up 91. The next 40 years after that, productivity up still 74, wages up 9, not 91, 9, an average of 9% wage growth for 40 years. That's not sustainable. We've got to figure out a way that when productivity goes up, wages are going with it or incomes are rising. And neither party, frankly, has come up with the game plan.
I could be wrong about that. I think if right now, and who knows, in presidential politics, you've been covering this, you're following this a long time, I think it's one of the top 3, 4, 5 issues.
I think you're right.
Do you agree?
Yep.
I mean, I think both the candidates, ultimately whoever they are, I think we know in the Democratic Party who it's likely to be since Joe Biden. I wanted to put you on the spot. What would you do? You have Joe Biden, who was born in your hometown, who left when he was 10, and Hillary Clinton's dad went to high school and played football for Penn State. What would Senator Kate?
Well,
you were in the middle on that one, Senator.
In April, when Hillary announced, I endorsed her. She was an unannounced candidate.
I knew that.
The vice president never announced, so I had made a decision.
He didn't call you and say, Senator, what are you doing
here? We see him around town a lot.
What's that?
I said I see him around town a lot.
Yeah. Well, I know when he comes back, he has a favorite restaurant he likes.
He's a wonderful guy. And look, I think even in this, he still has a lot of work to do as vice president. He's been I think, the best vice president ever.
We're out of time, but I want to tell you something.
Yes.
Why doesn't he run for vice president? He would be the longest vice president serving in American history. What do you think? Go ahead. I got to get that in.
I think we should propose that maybe.
Well, I mean, I always say there's some gene that you all in Scranton have for politics because you tend to produce all these political leaders. You, your dad. I mean, what can you say? I get the last word on my own program. But look, thanks for coming in. You're always welcome. Some wonderful insights. We'll have you back soon. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.